Okay, so let's talk for a second about union strength. So one of the big things that the Democrats have been pushing, the left has been pushing recently, is the idea that America's economy has not been growing equally because of the decline of American unions, that if unions were stronger, then they could be pushing in the private sector for more wage gain in the private sector. The idea is particularly that manufacturing and industry, that those industries have fallen behind, that the lack of union strength has led to all of this. You talk at length in Great Society about the union contribution to the Great Society, union involvement with the Great Society. And then you also talk about the fact that union states just basically stopped growing and very often fell behind economically. So what happened with America's unions? Were they good for America's economy? Were they bad? Where do they stand?
They made labor too expensive. And that didn't matter when we had no competition. When we began to have competition, the unions were indeed very powerful. They did indeed push up wages, and they made our automobiles uncompetitive. Just to give an example, let's stick with the United Auto Workers, because I focus a lot on Walter Reuther, the UAW leader, the Detroit Auto Union leader. He got so involved in politics and pushing up wages to help his workers that he failed to notice something on the landscape. That was the freight ship bringing over Toyotas. The Toyotas docked, the little Corollas rolled out. They were ridiculous, they were small, they ate our lunch. Eventually, you could track the story. Telescope it. They ate our lunch. We didn't notice. Oh, Americans like Toyotas. Oh, by the way, they're better made. Why is that? They're better made in part because, and this was new to me really, Ben. I mean, when I studied it, some people have studied in business school, Japanese assembly line projects, how a Japanese assembly line might differ from an American one. We were in this dance, worker v. employer, and it was pretty rough on the American assembly line. It was not pretty. When a worker was unhappy with the way something was going, he couldn't stop the assembly line. It was modern times. And the unions kind of like that because they like to sustain the hostility between the worker and the employer. That led to angry assembly lines and junky cars. In Japan, which we think of as such a rigid society, a worker could push a button and the assembly line would stop if he had an idea that might make the assembly line work better. And they listened to one another more, which we, in our stereotype, don't think is Japanese, such a hierarchical culture and so on. The unions there were weak. So their cars were better than our cars, and they made more cars per hour. Their productivity began to outstrip us in the 60s as they recovered from World War II. All of a sudden, Japan had cheaper, better cars, or Germany had cheaper, better cars. So the idea that a union is great, you can have that illusion if you have no competition. If you want to go the Donald Trump way and even farther and have giant protectionism, which the Democratic Party has to consider as well, then you might, for a time, be able to shut out competition, but not for long because people really like those Toyotas.
Yeah, we're seeing this now in negotiations over the USMCA, where the unions really got into the process and now have demanded that a certain number of man-hours going into the making of cars be produced at a certain wage, and that is supposed to hold true in Mexico as well as in the United States. I mean, it seems like a great way of pushing up the cost of vehicles past what Americans are going to be willing to buy in 5 or 10 years.
Right, I mean, there are two Americans, one is buying and the one is working.
Did you know that every like on this video creates one additional glorious leftist tear? Don't ask me why. That's called science. To take advantage of this amazing opportunity, just hit the like button.